I seen this yesterday, and I've heard about it the last week or two. There was talk about it. We didn't really have proof up until now, because the Justice Minister pretty much has said that he will give Garda Síochána the power, and the Defence Forces too, the power to look at WhatsApp groups and Instagram groups, encrypted chats, so WhatsApp groups, iMessage and Instagram, etc. Probably Twitter along with Facebook, along with pretty much every social media, emails too, to be able to look into it. Beforehand, they would have to get a warrant and stuff to look into it. They probably, in theory, they did, but in a lot of cases, they probably did without people knowing about it, because we've seen the United States. So pretty much this is like the Patriot Act in the United States. So the Gardaí now can just wander into your chat and look into your messages without you knowing, the Defence Forces too. Obviously, GDPR. Remember, every other time when they're talking about crimes that are committed by asylum seekers, so the GDPR, we can't give out names, we can't give out information, GDPR, we have to protect our privacy. But the Gardaí can look into your private information without so much of an if or a but about GDPR, because every other time you ask for any information, they go, oh, GDPR, we can't give out that GDPR, but apparently all that's been left aside. But nonetheless, this just goes to show you that the Irish state, and again, this is not to crack down on gangs and terrorist groups, organised crime. It's pretty much the style trying to find out what people are taking toward crime. And there was 2 crimes committed here in Cavan at the weekend. Just yesterday, 2 burglaries were committed. The person waited 2 hours for the Gardaí to turn up. These 2 individuals, they waited 2 hours for the Gardaí to bother to go out and investigate what happened. And they still have nobody, the people who burgled the house, they still haven't found them. Still haven't found any of the stuff they stole. But the Gardaí don't give a shit. But if you commit tort crime, they will care. If they were misgendered, there would be the army, there would be the whole armed support unit and everything out looking for them. But what I'm trying to say is, it is an infringement on civil liberties. And again, I know it's all well and good organised crime, terrorism and etc, etc. But at the end of the day, I don't trust the Irish state with this information. I don't trust them. Simple as that. There's literally people coming into the country without any passports, let's put it that way, and they don't care about that. So why would they care about organised crime, etc, etc? If they cared about security of the state and the defence of the state, they would be checking people's identities and not letting them in until they found out who they were. But they don't do that, they just let them in without any passports. So, and especially this, to organised crime and terrorism, that is not an excuse to trample on civil liberties and your freedom of speech, your freedom of expression, your freedom to associate, whatever. It's still not an excuse. It is an excuse. Obviously, we don't want to see this kind of carry on organised crime, etc. in Ireland. But still doesn't give the state a right to say, oh, because this is happening, we can infringe on everybody's rights and stamp out everybody's rights. But it is, and again, there'll be no, I'm sure to God there'll be no transparency from Garda Síochána to make sure there'll be no oversight to make sure the Garda are using this rightfully so and stuff. But it is just another infringement on the state, like people's civil liberties in this country. Because again, when they get an inch, and especially if you give the Gardaí, whatever the Defence Forces, when you give the Gardaí an inch, they take a mile. What I mean by that is, they could say, oh, it's for the greater good, so the common good, as they often would say here. But really, what is the common good, and what is their goal, I suppose? Because let's be fair, it is just to silence people, find out what people are taking. Tort crime, are they committing tort crime? Teen crime, you would call it too. But imagine that, and the Gardaí can't fight the crime on the street, and they're too busy worrying about what people are taking online in private group chats, etc. Now, don't get me wrong, there is crime going on in private group chats and stuff. In terms of serious organised crime, they do use WhatsApp groups and stuff, and scam groups too. They do use WhatsApp groups. Don't get me wrong, that's happening. But it is what I'm trying to emphasise, and I'm sure everybody gets it. It doesn't give the state the right to say, "Oh, we can look into anything we want." That's not freedom. That's not democracy. That's what they do in China. That's what they do in Russia. It shouldn't be the case here. But again, we hope the social media crowds don't give it to them and say, "Fuck you, Irish government. We won't give it to you." Because the idea is when they look into social media apps and stuff, they have to get a warrant. We've seen it recently enough in Ireland that they wanted to get access messages, the private messages of people in Ireland. Many other people, there was many people, I think Grip Media too, they wanted to find out who Grip Media were talking to, and they had to go to a judge to get a summons to summon Twitter to give their private information, their messages, etc. to the Irish state, to the Garda Síochána. And obviously Twitter told them to go fuck themselves, excuse my language, but that's what was pretty much told them. Which rightly so, because they really much were making up, because it's thought crime. There was no other crime committed, but it was thought crime, terrorism, as they said. But, in a way, terrorists can be considered as anything. If you against the government, you're a terrorist. Because that seems to be the modern phrasing of the Irish state. If you're far right and extremist, if you hold traditional values, you're an extremist, you're a terrorist, you should be arrested. If you disagree with the government's immigration policy, you're a terrorist. Because that's just the whole narrative. But what I'm trying to say behind this, the majority of people would see this. You could not trust the government. You cannot trust the Irish state with this information, because we hear all the time, as I said in the beginning, about GDPR. If I wanted to find information about a sex offender, take for example, that lives in my area, that could be a sex offender, the government won't give it out, the Gardaí won't give it out. It's simple as that, because GDPR would protect the GDPR. But if you're committing tort crime, we can give that out straight away to you. We'll find out straight away what you're doing. But again, this is just another step in terms of the totalitarian state we live in. And again, I would say to people, we have to stand up for our rights, because the Gardaí, as I say, this should go before the people, to be totally honest. If this was ever going to be implemented, it should go to the Irish people and say to the Irish people, should we give the Irish state, on God, the defence forces, the authority to look at private chats? Because that's the end of the day, that's what it should be going to, the referendum to the Irish people, to say to the Irish people, should this be allowed? Because this is an extreme infringement on civil liberties. And again, don't get me wrong, there's crime going on, there's organised crime, there's terrorist groups, there's ISIS in this country. We've seen recently in Galway, a young lad stabbed a chaplain, a priest, a member of the defence forces. He was radicalised by Islam, by ISIS, and had information, had a bit of bombs, etc. Don't get me wrong, that's happening. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not happening. It is happening. But at the same time too, we shouldn't be saying only because this happened. We should look at everybody's Instagram and private messages. People, Irish citizens, are entitled to their privacy. But of course too, if they're committing crimes and stuff, that should be looked into. But what I'm trying to say is, the Gardaí should not just be able to look into anybody's chat because they can. As I said, the system that it's at the moment, the Gardaí have suspicion, and reasonable suspicion, that you're committing terrorist offences, take for example, talking to ISIS or whatever, getting bomb materials or whatever. They can go to a judge, and the judge can sign off and get your information by a summons to these companies, take for example WhatsApp, for your DMs or whatever you would call the messages. And I think that system works well. If you have the Irish state has suspicion that you're committing terrorist offences, or if you're involved in organised crime. But as we've seen recently enough, as I said, in Ireland, the corrupt media, they were saying they were committing terrorism because they're questioning what the government are doing. So therefore, we're going to get their information and the DMs to find out who they're talking to. But of course, it didn't work out that way for them, so they were very upset, the Gardaí. But they shouldn't be getting this power. Simple as that, they shouldn't be getting it. Because they know, because again, this is the thing, the Irish state knows who are drug dealers, knows who are organised crime. They know the people, they're not stupid. The same with terrorism, they know who's associated with ISIS. They know, by Interpol will tell them, and they'll let them into the country first of all. They know all this. They don't need evidence really at this stage. They know who's involved in crime and stuff. They can find this out. If they wanted to. They know it already, let's put it that way. But again, this is just another infraction on civil liberties. But anyway, let me know what you think. Because again, this can be used and abused in many, many different ways. And just one more last thing I say. I was looking at the bill that the Minister of Justice. There's loads of holes. What I mean by that is there's loads of ifs and buffs. And what I mean by that is it can be phrased in many different ways in terms of what do they deem as a terrorist organisation, and what could they deem as a criminal organisation. There's not really the definitive particularly when you're drafting laws and legislation, you have to be specific on what you're wanting to target. This is kind of iffy, washy-washy in a lot of it. And a lot of it, if the Gardaí think this person's committing tort crime, that's pretty much that's what it says. If the Gardaí think, it's not if they have strong evidence to suggest this person's in a terrorist organisation that was involved with the Gardaí have strong information and strong intelligence to say so. If the Gardaí want to and think, pretty much, that's what the legislation pretty much says. Because it's pretty much very open, it can be used in a million different ways. That's what I'm trying to say. But anyway, let me know what you think, subscribe for more, and bye.